The world of 2022 has its share of problems, yet it's arguably safer than any moment since the end of the Cold War. 3 enormous threats loom: the climate crisis, pandemics, and resource scarcity. These are long-term problems that'll take decades or even centuries to solve, yet they can all be traced back to a single point: the decline of American power. But what if the Sino-Russian era had gone differently? We imagine a world where China and Russia came out of World War II victorious, reshaping the international order with their ally, Iran. How would such a world operate? And more importantly, how would it end? Welcome to What If Time Wrap, where we try and answer this question by exploring alternate histories and their potential outcomes. Today we ask, what if the world ended in World War III? In our last episode, we examined how the Sino-Russian dominated world would contend with these challenges, and we found that the existing system was rather fragile. While China, Russia, and Iran had achieved prosperity and stability within their borders, it came at a cost. Each nation had its own sphere of influence, but none of them were willing to relinquish power. Economic interdependence between the global North and South only highlighted this imbalance. With the memory of foreign domination still fresh, both sides were unwilling to bend. Nevertheless, we saw that the world was slowly progressing. Despite the political deadlock, cooperation on issues like climate change seemed inevitable. After all, they were all in the same boat. But what if that progress wasn't enough? What if the weight of their past and the anxieties of their future proved too great? There are 3 areas where the peace between these nations could break down. First, Iran, with their nuclear arms race, is potentially the biggest threat to peace. We know from episode 5 that Iran managed to enrich uranium to weapons grade, despite heavy sanctions. Even though their goal was to develop nuclear power, not weapons, they walked so that Israel could run. We saw how Israeli and Iranian nationalism combined to produce an arms race that spread across the region. Perhaps the most likely source of a war would be an attempt by one of these states to expand their nuclear program. It could start small: a disputed border, a contested island, or even an assassination. But soon Iran would find itself surrounded by nuclear powers, increasing their sense of vulnerability. To protect themselves, they would either have to develop their first weapon or rely on Russia and China for protection. But what if this doesn't happen in the Middle East? What if the trigger comes from the Sino-Russian alliance? While they may be allies today, we know from episode 7 that Russia has long sought to overcome China's economic and population size. They had accepted second place for now, but that wouldn't always be the case. Eventually, a clash of interest would re-emerge. One potential flashpoint is the Korean Peninsula. While North Korea is unlikely to reunite with the South, the presence of US troops remains a sensitive issue. As relations between China and the US deteriorate, Beijing would exert more pressure on Seoul to remove them. A compromise could come in the form of a unified Korea under Chinese-Russian control. But what if talks collapse? Then the choice is clear: accept defeat or go down in flames. Finally, the third potential cause of conflict is financial. We know from episode 6 that China's Belt and Road Initiative has accumulated hundreds of billions in bad loans. If the initiative collapsed, China would be left with few options to improve their economy. That in turn could affect the rest of the world. Russia, who sells most of their exports to Europe, would suffer if China fell into recession. Meanwhile, Iran would struggle to finance its nuclear program and maintain its alliances. Any one of these events could trigger a cascade effect, leading to the collapse of the entire world order. Before we continue, let me quickly explain the format of this special episode. We'll begin by simulating the situation through the lens of some of our favorite geopolitical grand strategy games. From there, we'll use our collective knowledge of history and the in-game mechanics to speculate how the real world might react. Finally, we'll step back and reflect on the meaning of this fascinating experiment. Before we dive into this chaotic adventure, let's simulate this alternate history with a game of world in conflict. To do that, we'll need to make some changes to the normal rules. Since this is an alternate history, we won't simulate the early Cold War. Instead, we'll fast forward to 2020 and place the player in charge of the Russian Federation. Of course, we'll also need to tweak the map to resemble our timeline. The key difference here is the survival of Iran. Fortunately, the game gives us the tools to change that. With some simple editing, we can restore the Persian Empire and adjust the borders. Now, to set the stage, we need to account for the other two superpowers. For China, we'll change their government type to communist and increase their industry and infrastructure to reflect their status as an economic superpower. We'll do the same for Iran, although their main strength is their military. Unfortunately, the game engine doesn't allow us to change government types without restarting the game, so we'll have to settle for a monarchy. Finally, we'll add some flavor to the map by making Germany a puppet state of Russia. Now that our map is ready, we can get to work. Our first objective is securing the Caucasus region, which includes Georgia and Azerbaijan. China already controls Central Asia, so the only way to prevent a Chinese takeover is to establish a buffer state. Fortunately, we already have the perfect candidate, Turkey. By converting them to communism, we ensure that the Turkic states remain loyal to Moscow. From there, it's just a matter of expanding westward. We'll start by supporting separatist movements in Poland and Romania. At the same time, we'll pressure Germany into giving us control of the Baltic states. But China is preparing to intervene. Their new leader, Xi Jinping, is eager to test his power. We'll need to stop him before he solidifies control over Mongolia. The best way to do that is to convert Mongolia to a Soviet satellite state. While technically a loss for China, it's ultimately a minor setback. Mongolia's loyalty will shift over time, and we can focus on more pressing matters like securing the Korean peninsula. Our plan is simple. We'll help North Korea reunify with the South and install a puppet regime. But as we move our troops into position, we discover that China has beaten us to the punch. They've already secured control of South Korea, and we're forced to sign a non-aggression pact. Once again, we've lost valuable territory, but we'll get another chance soon. China's massive population is beginning to overwhelm their economy, and their demand for resources will only grow in the future. If we can instigate a rebellion, we could cut off their access to the Pacific. Japan would be the ideal candidate, but convincing them to rebel will be difficult. Fortunately, we have a secret weapon. By leveraging their historical animosity towards the Japanese, we managed to secure an alliance with the Koreans. Together, we'll march into Kyushu and force the Japanese surrender. Control over the Korean peninsula gives us access to the Pacific Ocean. We're now in a strong position to dominate Northeastern Asia. We'll focus on developing our military to ensure no hostile power threatens our security. Meanwhile, Iran has suffered a major setback. Their efforts to develop a bomb have been exposed, and the United Nations has imposed heavy sanctions. To protect their program, they'll need to expand their military capabilities. Their first order of business is improving their air force. Without Western technology, their only option is buying from Russia. As the years pass, we watch nervously as Iran's nuclear program advances. Soon they'll reach the point of no return. China and Russia will receive a notification informing them of the development. There's nothing they can do about it. Both powers fear the consequences of open conflict. For now, they'll have to accept Iran's decision. As the game reaches its climax, we see the fragility of this new world order. Russia, China, and Iran are locked in a tense standoff. Each one knows that the slightest mistake could trigger a nuclear apocalypse. There are no clear winners in this scenario. Each power has sacrificed something important for their victory. Russia has expanded its territory and wealth, but at the cost of its autonomy. China has secured its borders and economic prosperity, but at the cost of its population's freedom. Iran has developed a nuclear arsenal, but at the cost of its national security. The only constant in this rapidly changing world is one thing: the fear of war. While our simulation is bleak, it's ultimately just a game. Let's step back and consider what a post-World War III world would look like. The biggest threat to humanity is undoubtedly nuclear weapons. If Russia, China, and Iran each possessed nukes, then a direct conflict would likely result in mutually assured destruction. If humanity were to somehow survive, the world would look very different. It is possible that the remaining countries would unite and form a new world government tasked with preventing another war. Or maybe the world would simply fracture into countless smaller states, each unwilling to trust the others. It's also worth considering the role of nuclear weapons in this new world order. We know from real-world history that nuclear weapons have a strange way of deterring war. Even during the height of the Cold War, neither side dared strike first. The presence of nukes provided a strange form of stability. Similarly, in our timeline, the threat of nuclear war prevented the United States from intervening in the affairs of other nations. However, things could get complicated when one of those nations developed their own nuclear weapons. The Iranian example shows that nuclear weapons can be having a nuke doesn't necessarily prevent aggression, but it does raise the stakes. Suddenly, a minor conflict could escalate into a nuclear exchange. Finally, we should also consider the impact on the environment. The Second World War devastated the planet. Much of Europe and Asia lay in ruins, and it took decades for the planet to recover. What would a Third World War look like? Imagine entire cities being wiped off the map, forests being scorched, and millions of refugees flooding into neighboring countries. Nuclear fallout would contaminate vast swaths of land, rendering them stuck in the shadowlands between habitability and complete destruction. It's a grim picture and one we hope never to see. Thank you for joining us as we explored a world where the Sino-Russian alliance crumbled and the nuclear spectre loomed large. As the curtain falls on this thought experiment, remember that history doesn't have to repeat itself. We can learn from the mistakes of the past and strive to build a better future.